Hello, writers, and welcome to the Researchers Writing Podcast. This podcast is for all your researchers in the sciences who want to write papers in a structured and time efficient way so you can get published in top tier journals at a calm and steady pace. In this podcast, we talk about how we can write papers that are clear, concise, and compelling, and how to make the process of writing less hard. My name is Dr. Anna Clemens, and I am an academic writing coach with a PhD in chemistry. In the Researchers Writing Academy, my online program, I've helped hundreds of researchers get their papers published in their target journals using a streamlined writing process. If you want to succeed in your academic career, mentor your students effectively, and have your research make an impact in the world, you are in the right place. Let's get into it. Hello, writers. Thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk about the introduction section, which is honestly the section that when I ask researchers, well, which part of your paper do you find hardest to write? This is the section that I hear most often. So it seems like the introduction section is a really big deal. Um, it honestly surprised me a little bit when I started out as an academic writing coach, because I thought the discussion section would be the one that researchers would find, the trickiest, because I honestly think it's the trickiest. But this is also kind of good news because that means there's a lot I can hopefully, teach you or hopefully give you some aha moments about, because the introduction section really doesn't have to be quite as hard as it seems to be for many researchers to write. So, kind of what I hear from researchers about the introduction section um, are several problems. I'm going to read out a few of those to see if maybe, this is the case for you too. So, what I hear is, oh, my introductions are just very long and generic, and I then end up with a lot of references. Or I hear, oh, I find it very difficult to write like succinct and focused paragraphs within the introduction section. Or synthesizing the literature for the introduction section just is very complex, and I get stuck on that. So crafting this like compelling introduction section feels like a battle. Trying to organize sort of all the ideas takes so much time. And when things take a lot of time, that often leads to procrastinations, or when processes are kind of really like cumbersome, that often leads to then that we procrastinate on doing them. Um, Another point is, oh, I just don't have a clear process. And sometimes that actually leads me to produce unclear text. So kind of the text shows that I don't have a good process for writing the introduction section. Or I over-explain and my introduction sections are long. A lot of people also are unsure about what the level of detail should be in introduction sections. Um, Another researcher I talked to told me, oh, I've gotten the feedback that I just describe too many theories in my introductions. Um, and lastly, what I've heard is, oh, I'm just kind of like copy pasting from previous papers I've wrote, or other papers in the field, and it doesn't feel like I'm actually writing the best introduction I could be to my paper. And yeah, I think a lot of researchers aren't using the introduction section effectively when I read the scientific literature. So that's why I want to give you the head start. And I want to talk you through the 7 mistakes I see the most often in introduction section and tell you how to do better. So the first mistake is not including an element of tension. So common. Honestly, I think this is the biggest shift you can make when you start incorporating an element of tension. This is sort of the biggest effect you can make on your introduction section. So if you only do one of these things I'm talking about today, do this one, honestly. Um, So the thing is, what we want to do in an introduction section, we don't only want to provide kind of this review of the literature. This is not what the introduction section is for. I know this, maybe that's surprising to hear. But the function of the introduction section is to contextualize your study. So this is about your study, and not about the literature. I think the introduction section, this is the best place to convince your reader, and that does include your journal editor and your peer reviewers, keep that in mind, that the topic that you're presenting is important and indeed needs investigating now. This is, I think, what you can do in the introduction section. Your topic is important and it needs to be investigated now. What I suggest using to convince readers of that is storytelling. Storytelling is such a powerful tool. We've talked about this in detail. I've talked about this in detail to you in episode number 7, I think. So go back and listen to that one if you haven't yet, if you want to know sort of the whole concept of storytelling and how that kind of, how you can map the whole story, scientific story structure onto your paper. What you do in the introduction section is your first act. So the first act of your story where you set the scene, which means in the introduction section, in your first act of your story, you want to present your main characters, aka what you're studying. You want to present the setting, which means where's the research field now, and you want to present an element of tension, meaning what is still unknown. You I really, really urge you to do this. Include a problem, a very succinct and clear problem in your field. Um, because tension, this element of tension, is really the most important element of every story. This is like tension, like this conflict, this problem that characters have to overcome, the catastrophe, in like films and movies. This is what makes a story a story. As you watch movies, as you watch films, as you watch TV shows, as you read books, like start paying attention to that. There will always be, in almost all cases, be this element of tension. Maybe if you have a bit more like, what's the word? Well, a bit more like experimental films, art house, that was the word I was looking for, art house films. You don't always have that. They may follow a bit of like a more unconventional structure, but most of the things we watch, most of the things that are most of the stories, most of the plots that are very successful, meaning they bring a lot of money in, they get a lot of people to watch them, are the ones that have a very clear element of tension introduced in their first act. And this is what you want to do in your paper. um, in the context of writing a scientific paper, well, an element of tension could be, well, some kind of problem in your field. Like there must be a reason why you chose to study what you studied, right? It may be a gap in the knowledge of literature. It may be a conflict. It may be like a contradiction you found in the literature. It may be a disagreement between different authors, like between different research groups, perhaps. It may be a claim that has been made in the literature that is weakly evidenced, etc., etc. So your introduction section really is that part of your paper where you want to make a strong case for why the problem that you decided to address in your study is an important and urgent one to solve. So do use the space you have, and I promise you it will make your whole scientific paper a lot more compelling. All right, let's get to the second mistake. Mistake number 2 is your introduction section is too long. Most introduction sections I read are too long. And this kind of, I think the reason for this is that a lot of researchers are trying to present like sort of a complete review of the literature on the topic they're studying. Again, I mentioned this in the previous mistake. That's not what the introduction is for. this is what review articles are for, or what books are for, right? There's other places where we want to kind of present this like complete review of the literature. And also, actually, if you have some papers have, especially in more like the social sciences, you often have a subsection maybe in your introduction section that is called a literature review. And this is a bit confusing because still, we don't mean for you to write a whole review of the literature within that section. Still, the literature you're presenting should be super geared towards the current study. Like, this is what the reader of your paper cares about. They don't want to get an overview of the whole field. Unless this is like really missing, like you have you're like looking into a topic that really isn't covered yet, like you're super like new into like a research topic. Okay, maybe you need to, have a little bit more there. But in most cases, we are kind of embedded in in a research field where others are producing papers and where there are literature reviews and books, etc., where like a lot of these things can be read up on. So you do not want to present all the studies that are ever so slightly related to your research. So, what's a better approach is to only mention those aspects of what other people have studied or what you have studied previously that are needed to contextualize the problem your study is solving. So pay attention to how I worded this. I said to contextualize the problem your study is solving. So you don't even just want to contextualize your study. Think when you write the introduction section, you want to contextualize the problem you're solving. So you want to really motivate to the reader, right? You want to convince your reader that the problem you're solving with a study is important and super urgent to solve. And then you only want to mention those studies or those aspects of the studies that are helping you do that. Sometimes journals even tell you how long the introduction section should be. But most of the time, I would say you have a lot of freedom there, which is not always a good thing. Um, but I just want to say, if you look at really like top tier journals, especially I think in the health sciences, but also others, they often want really short introductions. Like 2 paragraphs is often all they want, really. So keep that in mind. I would say, it's hard to say, how long should my introduction section be then? How many paragraphs should I have? It really depends on your journal and on your study. But in general, I would say, like, this is super general though. I almost don't want to say it. But like 4 paragraphs, 3 to 4 paragraphs. If you can get it down to that, that would be fantastic. And if it can be less, and it's normal in the journal to have less, then make it less. Like the shorter the better, always. I just wanted to mention a tip that I give members of the Researchers Writing Academy often, which is if you find your introduction section is too long and you've already written it, then what you may want to do is go through, each sentence, sentence by sentence, word by word, and just check, does every sentence need to be here? Or if I could delete that sentence, would I still would the whole story that I'm telling there still make sense? Would I still motivate my problem or not? And if you think, oh, I can actually delete this bit, then do that. All right. Mistake number 3 is too long paragraphs. Yeah, so not only the whole introduction section is often too long, but also the paragraphs within that section. And why do we not want long paragraphs? Well, really nobody likes to read a wall of text. I mean, you know that, right? You don't like that either, I suppose. And readers really often skim read, especially this has been shown, especially when we read on a screen, which is, I guess, how most of us these days are reading scientific papers. We just skim read, like we've just trained our brain to do that. We kind of read the beginning of a paragraph and then judge, oh, is this paragraph important or not? Yeah, so if you have a really big wall of text, it's really hard to skim read. So I would give readers that chance so they can quickly make their way through your paper. It will help them. And whatever helps the reader is generally a good thing to do in your paper. Yeah, long paragraphs. I mean, this is a tricky one because I think it's often actually easier to write a long paragraph rather than a short paragraph. Because when you write a short paragraph, you have to kind of condense what you want to say. You have to often do more work in order to, well, get across what you want to say, right? Being concise often takes more time. I would say, again, to give you like a rule of thumb, the optimal length of a paragraph should be 100 to 200 words. Um, yes, maybe start counting some words in your document and see if you're hitting that. It may be a lot shorter than what you're currently doing. Again, it really pays off writing short paragraphs. It really helps you to focus. It helps you being more intentional about what you want to say in the paragraph. And also, actually, ideally, you want to plan out your whole introduction section in advance. So do you plan out your paragraphs in advance? That helps you write those short paragraphs. Highly recommend doing that. Just ensures you don't go down rabbit holes that you end up deleting afterwards. Like that's really not an efficient way to write a paper. And also, if you plan it out beforehand, that really ensures that you have a really good flow in your introduction section, a really good flow of information, which makes it a really good read. All right, let's get to mistake number 4. Um, and mistake number 4 is your sentences are too long. Yep, sentences too. So I see this a lot when researchers are trying to sound maybe a little like more fancy. They want to come across as an expert, and then they start writing really like complicated, long sentences with like a lot of subordinate clauses. But as a skillful academic writer, you don't need to do that. This is not what skillful academic writers do. Instead, what we want to do is we want to write in a way that our readers understand quickly what exactly we want to say. So, short sentences. So it helps us do that. And it's actually a lot harder to write shorter sentences. Same as with the paragraphs, like being concise is harder than writing like a lengthy bloated piece. And it can be hard sometimes because when you want to make your writing flow, it can be really hard to chop a long sentence in two because you're kind of not sure, oh, how can I like keep the flow if I then like chop up the sentences? Um, and I have a rule of thumb here that I want to share with you that I also teach in the Researchers Writing Academy. And this is try to write just one main and one subordinate clause in every sentence. So a main clause, or rather a subordinate clause, is the part of the sentence that like begins with that, which, although, because, these kind of words. And there is a little trick that sometimes works when you want to break up sentences in your introduction that I want to share with you. Not everyone likes this trick, I should say. I like it though. I think it makes writing clear and it's totally fine, I think, to do this one. Um, so when you have a very long sentence that and you want to kind of get rid of the last subordinate clause. And for example, let's say the last subordinate clause then starts with because. Then you can just basically put a full stop before because, and then you start the next sentence with this is owing to, or this is because of. And that way, super easy. You were able to like just chop the sentence. The same way, if your subordinate clause starts with which, um, and you want to kind of break that off into a new sentence, you can just start the new sentence with this or these, so and so. So it's a bit cheating. Some people think it's inelegant, but honestly, I don't mind it at all as long as it's really clear whatever you're mentioning. This effect, for example, or these model systems or whatever, you're saying as long as it's clear what that refers to, then I think this is totally fine. Next mistake, mistake number 5 is the first sentence of your introduction section is boring. If you want to learn a systematic method for writing research papers, then I have just the right resource for you. It is a free on-demand training session where I walk you through the journal publication formula step by step. So this really is for all researchers who want to get published in those top-tier journals using a streamlined writing process from start to finish. You just have to head to researcherswritingpodcast.com/free to access that free training. So that was researcherswritingpodcast.com/free to, watch that free training immediately. Okay, let's get back to the episode. Yes, you heard me right. The first sentence in any paragraph is just such a powerful position. I mentioned this earlier when I said how we like skim read and then often read like the first sentence of a paragraph. But the first sentence, the first sentence of the very first paragraph in your scientific paper is really one of the most powerful positions in the whole paper. And that's the first sentence of the introduction section. Almost everyone will read that sentence. As soon as they get past the abstract, people will most likely read that sentence. So it's a real shame if you throw away your chance there. And unfortunately, I see this all the time. Like researchers, I feel like are not using this like real estate effectively. And it's hard. It's a little hard to write a really powerful first sentence. There's a bit of an art to it, which we practice quite a lot in the Researchers Writing Academy. This is one of the things we're really trying to workshop with our members so that their first sentences get like super on point. Well, so the first sentence in your introduction really needs to capture your readers, and you can do this by signaling to them why they need to care about your study. And a really great way of doing this is to give them a hint of this like wider problem that your study was motivated by. Like we talked about this element of tension earlier, which is like the specific like problem that motivates your study. But at the beginning of the introduction section, we want to kind of look at a bit of a wider problem. And that means that, well, your introduction section really needs to be tailored to the readership of the journal you're submitting your paper to. So that first sentence, right? That first sentence that we're writing in the introduction section, that should appeal to the readership of the journal you're submitting your paper to. For example, if you're submitting to Nature, Science & Co., well, your first sentence needs to kind of describe a very like rather broad scientific problem that the readership, which is very broad of those journals, will understand and care about. But if you then submit to like a more specialist journal, as I guess most of us are doing most of the time, well, you can start a little deeper into the matter, but you still need to kind of align it to the readership of the journal. All right. Well, 5 mistakes we talked about already. Let's get to mistake number 6 researchers make when writing the introduction section, and that is that there's no flow in the introduction section. Yeah, what makes research papers readable is when the writing flows. Well, that's what makes everything readable, really. Like if you think back to when you were really like immersed in a novel and you just like, a real page turner, that's usually those where the authors really made the writing flow really well. And flow means then the reader can easily follow from one sentence to the next one without ever getting stuck. And this is good for you as an author if your reader is just like, glued to your text and can't stop reading your introduction section, because they're less likely to stop, right? They're just like going to read whatever you want to tell them, whatever you want to communicate to them. And yeah, you know how short attention spans have gotten and how busy everyone is. So that's a real, real important thing to be able to do as an author. Also, yeah, you don't want your reader to make too much of an effort to read your text. So you really want to make it easy for them because as soon as they feel like, oh, this is a lot of effort to read, they are more likely to stop. If they have to think for themselves and kind of make connections themselves because the connections aren't there, easy for them to understand, they're more likely to then stop reading your paper altogether. And if your reader is, well, your journal editor, then and they are getting like confused or they are having to do a lot of work to understand what you're writing about, they may deem your paper to not be worthy for their journal. They may think, well, the authors are not communicating very well to me what the problem is, or maybe you don't convince them of the problem, which may then lead them to, well, desk reject your paper, right? So I really, really highly recommend you to connect your sentences and paragraphs together so that your introduction section flows. You really want to have all the information in the introduction section presented in a logical order. And yeah, I really think the best way to do this is by mapping out the introduction section before you're writing it. So not just sitting down and like word vomit onto the page, everything. That you can think of or like piecing together from here and there, but rather to really sit down and think of the structure of that section before you start writing. On to our last mistake, which is mistake number 7, using too many synonyms in your introduction section. This is really another bad habit I'm seeing. And it's so, so common. It's so easy to do. Like, I'm not blaming you at all. We often feel like when we're writing introduction sections that we shouldn't repeat ourselves. So that if we repeat ourselves, well, the reader gets bored because they just keep rereading the same word. And I totally understand where this is coming from. And this is kind of really um, this is, I don't know, this is advice sometimes novice writers get as well. But it really isn't a good practice to throw in as many synonyms as possible because readers get confused. And when readers get confused, they may stop reading your paper. So if you don't want them to like take away the wrong thing or not understanding at all what you're communicating to them, like you want to be super clear. Like being clear should be when you write a paper, you're like, this should be a top priority to be clear. And I want to give you an example of using too many synonyms that came up in our last feedback call that I hosted for the Researchers Writing Academy, where I gave feedback on an abstract. And the researcher who submitted their abstract had used the words climate hazard and disaster risk in their abstract. And my question to them was, well, does this mean the same? Because you're using hazard and you're using disaster, and it's like, yeah, the hazard and the risk, does this mean the same thing or is this like a different thing? To me, as a non-expert of the study, I didn't know. It really wasn't clear to me. To them, it was, of course, totally clear. In that case, I think it was two different things, if I remember correctly. I can't remember. We then rewrote it to not have so many like confusing synonyms because even making the reader think, oh, is this now the same or not the same? Like this is bad, even if they're two different things. You want to describe things distinctly enough so that the reader isn't even stopping and wondering these questions. Yeah, it's so so difficult because you as the author, you're so familiar with your work, and you're probably using different synonyms when you talk about it to your colleagues or when you read about your topic. There's probably like, you know, for some things, different synonyms that are used in the literature. But really, this is such an easy thing to do and such a widespread thing that people do wrong. So really, this is like low-hanging fruit to just think of, okay, what is the best synonym to use throughout my paper and then to just use that. And you can even say for clarity if, you know, other researchers in your field have used a different synonym, um, but you decided for whatever reason that that synonym you're using is better, then you can even say in the beginning, when you introduce the thing you're talking about, that it's also sometimes referred to the other synonym, but then you use consistently throughout the text your synonym. So that's just a suggestion of how you could deal um, with that. Yeah, well, we've gone through all seven mistakes. Thank you so much for listening so far. If you want to know, sort of, if you're interested in sort of the whole process step by step to write an introduction section, I highly recommend checking out the Researchers Writing Academy, where we talk about this in detail, where we teach you, where we guide you through every step. And hopefully, this podcast episode already gave you some ideas. As always, I'd love to hear what sort of resonated most with you. What was the thing that you're really gonna start doing differently when you write introduction sections from now on? So put it in the YouTube comments if you're watching there, or please find me on social media and let me know. Well, let us get to our listener question now. Today's question is from Milan. Thank you, Milan. And Milan is asking, are longer or shorter blocks of writing time better? As always, love the question. And my answer to that question, whether you should use shorter blocks or longer blocks to write, is well, both. I think the best writing routine is kind of three-pronged. So you want to use frequent short writing sessions. And what I mean by this is like 45 minutes to 2 hour sessions. You want to have sessions like this almost every week, maybe 1 to 2 times per week, ideally. If you can do more, that's of course great. But let me tell you, 1 to 2 times is already a really, really good start. That's already solid. If you do this consistently, you'll get a lot of writing done. Then, on top of that, I think once a month, have a mini writing retreat. A mini writing retreat is to me a 3 to 4 hour block. Maybe 3 hours is actually enough. Um, this is what we do in the Researchers Writing Academy as well, where we host every month several actually writing retreats, these kind of mini writing retreats where you have a bit of a larger block of time. And then the third sort of part of your writing routine, in the ideal case, is if once per term or once per quarter, you have either a writing sprint, which is 1 to 2 weeks, ideally 2 weeks of dedicated writing. You're really hyper focusing, you're really prioritizing writing over everything else, except for your health and family and all those things. But in your workplace, in your work, writing is the priority. This is where your deep work time goes almost every day during those 2 weeks. And you can do this on or off campus. Or rather, writing sprint, I would say, is probably more like, you know, uh, integrated in your normal workday, more or less. Of course, you can choose a different place as well. But also the second option, if you don't want to do a writing sprint, is to do a writing retreat that spans several days. So you do kind of a 2, 3, 4 day writing retreat. And ideally, for writing retreats, I think you can do them in your office. So you can organize them for yourself, or maybe join an online writing retreat that spans several days. But you could also, I think, what's even more powerful is attending one off campus and kind of really indulge a bit in this, like, kind of your the part of your work that is being a writer, to really to really take that time to really feel like, wow, I'm a writer, I'm going to a writing retreat. I think that just does a lot for like your identity as a writer, and like community, and like with other researchers, with other writers in real time, is like even more powerful than online. And yeah, there's also a lot of research um, on how good writing retreats are. So definitely recommend that. Um, so let's talk a little bit, or I want to talk a little bit about why I think ideally you have both shorter blocks and longer blocks of time. So I think the short sessions are important because you kind of keep the momentum going like throughout the semester, throughout your term, right? Throughout your whole year, more or less. You can of course have breaks, and it's like totally normal and totally, I don't know, you should expect that this you can't have like your, you know, short sessions going on every week, but you want to have them most weeks, I would say. Um, so your writing just stays top of mind, and your subconscious can kind of work away while you're not writing, and you really get a lot done this way. I see it like this is the foundation of your writing routine, of your writing practice. Then the mini retreats, they are to tackle a bit bigger problems. So whenever you maybe have something that you've kind of been like pushing away and you never felt like, oh, I don't really have enough time to start this bigger project right now. I'm not sure how this is gonna go. Um, this is where like a bigger chunk of time every now and again, every month is really, really useful for. You can have like a bit of a push towards maybe a bit more difficult task or just to get a bit more headway, a bit more writing done on your paper. And then the writing sprints or writing retreats, yeah, I said earlier they really strengthen your identity as a writer. The community aspect is just really, really great of those. Um, but also they're really good for harder papers that you've been procrastinating on, or getting papers finished. If you really want to make meaningful progress on a paper, maybe like get it ready for submission. It's super good to do this in a writing sprint. These are a lot of fun. We've hosted a few writing sprints inside the Researchers Writing Academy, and we keep hosting them regularly every quarter. And yeah, it's maybe like the most favorite thing that members of the Researchers Writing Academy tell us about of the whole program, which is funny to me. But yeah, it's just nice having this community, and yeah, we do in the Researchers Writing Academy facilitate actually all three of those parts of the writing routine. So we have as the kind of shorter block, we have co-writing sessions multiple times per week, which are 1 hour writing time. With a mini like check-in at the beginning and then a mini like, hey, reflection, how did it go at the end? We host those mini retreats several times per month. And then we also, as I said, host those writing sprints once a quarter. Yeah, that's why we do this. So maybe if you're a member of the Researchers Writing Academy, you've been wondering why we host different things. Well, different things work for different people, but also because ideally, I think the writing routine should have those three parts. Well, Milan, I hope this answers your question. If you if you're doing one of those things and not the other, then maybe, I invite you to, explore, start finding out, start trying to integrate the other parts of the writing routine into your writing practice. And if you or any one of you who's listening or watching, if you're not doing any of this, if you currently don't have any sort of writing routine going and you're like, oh, this sounds great, but like this seems overwhelming, right? Having like three parts to my writing routine. Then I would definitely recommend start with the short sessions. Like that's your foundation. Start with like 1 hour once per week and then build the habit up from there. Cool. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope this was useful and yeah, see you soon again. Bye. If you would like to submit a question for me to answer on the podcast, please head to researcherswritingpodcast.com/question. That's researcherswritingpodcast in one word.com/question. And if you enjoyed this podcast episode, it would really mean the world to me if you could review it in your favorite platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever app you're using. The more reviews a show has, the more likely it will be shown to others who are looking for podcasts in the academic writing space. So thank you.